And welcome back, everyone. Denise, thank you so much for joining us here today. It is truly an honor to speak with you. Denise Fickman was born in Paris, France in 1938. In 1942, Denise's father, aunt, and uncle were taken from their home and deported to Auschwitz. Denise's mother sent her 6 children and 2 nieces to hide on a farm, but they were soon separated and sent to different families and then to a convent and monastery. Denise stayed in the convent until 1948 and was then called back to Paris to live with her mother and her new husband. Denise finished her high school studies in France, and in 1956 she joined her cousin in Montreal, where she worked as a secretary. She married her husband, Milan Hans, in 1956 and started a family and then moved to Toronto in 1979. Denise has been very active in the Jewish community, in organizations, and after she retired, she became involved directly with with Holocaust education through the March of the Living and Toronto Holocaust Museum. So, welcome, Denise. Thank you again for speaking with me today, and your willingness to share such deeply personal memories.
Thank
Let's
you.
begin if you're
Thank
ready.
you, Elena. Hi,
Thank you.
everybody. I am very honored to be speaking to you today. And I hope that I won't show that I am very nervous because I am not going to be after a little while. But welcome to my presentation.
Thank you. And I know our audience is a very kind and respectful one, so please don't be nervous, but we'll get you warmed up very soon. So maybe you could begin, Denise, by sharing a little bit. So you were born in Paris in 1938. So can you share a little bit about what life was like for your family at the time?
Yes, well, in 1938, I don't remember too much. I know that in November was Kristallnacht, so that was a big event of that year, beside me being born.
Hmm.
And France was always very anti-Semitic country. Um, Everybody remembered the Dreyfus affair, which was very well known.
Hmm.
But my parents were not religious. It was a very liberal atmosphere. And until the birth of my other sister, we had a normal life in the Marais, which was the center of Paris. My parents had come from Poland, and they were in Paris, my father for a very long time, and my mother came to France in 1919 when she was 19 years old. So we were like everyone else. We belonged to a Jewish group because all our friends and relatives were Jewish. And in that district of Le Marais, it was a very divertised uh, group of people. We had all kinds. It was on the 4th arrondissement, and it was called Le Marais.
Hmm. Okay. It must have been a very vibrant community to be a part of in that time. So maybe you could share with us a little bit, Denise, how did things change for your family and other Parisian Jews when France was invaded by the Nazis in 1940?
Okay, so in 1940, um, France was invaded only halfway in France because France was divided into 2 zones. The north of France was the occupied zone,
Mm.
and the bottom was the free zone because the Maginot Line was in the south with Italy. But the Germans didn't come through the Maginot Line. They came through Belgium. So they occupied the north part of France, and the bottom part was the free zone. Now, at that time, in 1940, the government of France fell, it was the Third Republic, and the new head of state was the Maréchal Pétain, who had been a very important figure in the First World War at the Battle of Verdun. And the Maréchal decided to have his cabinet in the city of Vichy, and that's where it was in the free zone. Now, in the free zone, of course, came a lot of refugees from the other countries who were invaded before France. So at that time, the Maréchal Pétain was he imposed very anti-Semitic laws, and he was actually a very big collaborator with France. He was in accordance with the Germans against the Jews, and it didn't make any difference because the Jews of the free zones were sent anyway to the camp of Drancy and then to Auschwitz. So at that time, in 1940, France had signed an armistice, and the German promised that they wouldn't demolish everything in France, even though there were bombs and so on coming on. And then in they also wanted all the people, all the Jews, to wear a Jewish star. That was from 1940, and you had to be 6 years old. So my brother he was born in 35, so in 41, he had to wear the Jewish star. And as a matter of fact, I have here the authentic star.
Wow.
You see it?
We can see it.
Yes. So that was my brother. It's written Juif, which is normal. It means Jew in France.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. So in a sense, as you're speaking, Denise, it makes me think, that some Pétain, some of the collaboration forces were willing to sacrifice France's Jews in a way to, salvage Paris or whatever, some structures. That's very tragic. So, Denise, could you share a little bit about if you have any direct memories? You were a very young child during this period, correct? So,
Yes.
do you have direct memories from the Second World War?
The memories of during the war are very varied and very important in my story. My story actually starts with the birth of my sister Monique. In 1941, we are 5 children. I am the 4th one of 5 children, and my mother is expecting her 6th child. Unfortunately, on the 14th of May, 1941, there is a big raft, which is a roundup of 8,500 Jews who they receive a green paper, which is like that, and it's a notice telling them to go to the police station. So my father goes to the police station, and my uncle also goes to the police station because he received a green paper like this as well. This is in the 14th of May. My mother is expecting the baby for November. So my father is not there, which is the first shock that I received, that I remember, because my father is not there and I was very attached to him, and he's gone. Then my sister, on the 13th of September, she's born at home. So I remembered very, very clearly the birth of my sister Monique. The reason she is at home is because no Jews was allowed to go to the hospital. So my mother had a midwife come, and I remember my sister Monique, the first cry of that baby. And I remember very clearly in what room it was, and all my siblings. And my mother's sister was also in our apartment with her two daughters. So it was a very happy event. Now, for that occasion, my father was supposed to receive a pass in order to be at the birth, but he came late. He came like 2 weeks later, and then when he came for about 2-3 weeks, and then he had to go back to the holding camp, which was Pithiviers. That was a holding camp. The French people, they didn't know exactly what's going on. So that was just a holding camp. It was not an extermination camp. So the men were all there, and of course, 8,500 men there, all with family, with children, without any other way of earning. So it was so chaotic in France at that time that even the government realized that they made a mistake by taking so many men, because they had to take care of what they left. So so my father gets the pass, and for a few weeks he's with us, and then the pass stops, and we have to go to get an extension. In order to get the extension, my mother would take us, all the 6 children, and we would travel by train to the city of Orleans, where we would speak to the Gestapo, the place where they were in charge of that situation. So I remember going to Orleans a few times, and the German, the soldier behind the desk would sign the extension, and for a long time, my father was at home, but like I said before, we couldn't call him. He was not supposed to be home except with the pass. Later on, the last pass expired, and we go to Orleans, and I remember this very clearly. Everyone is dressed to the best of our clothes, and we come to the Gestapo. We look at the captain who is behind his desk, and he is very agitated. He is red in the face. He doesn't look comfortable. So my mother does the request, and he says, no, you don't get any more passes, because he has enough. He has to go back to Pithiviers. And he is so adamant, and he has a big voice. So the baby starts to cry. She is a tiny baby. She starts to cry. So what happens usually when one person or a child in a family starts crying, then everyone cries. So there is so much noise that my mother gets scared. And she says, fine, we're going. And she starts pushing the children. I even remember that I was behind my mother. So I see the children going one by one. And as my mother passes with the baby on her arm in front of the captain, she takes the baby, puts her on the desk, and she says, without my husband, I cannot feed that child, so I'm giving her to you. And the German is so shocked by this action that very quickly he signs an extension. And we all go out of the room, and we come back to Paris. And at this point in my story, if you don't mind, Elena, I like to mention that the reason that I speak mostly it's to give homage to my mother, because without her, I wouldn't be here. And you can see how strong a person she was just by doing that, taking that action. And so that's why I speak.
Thank you.
So after that, so my father stays with us, but when the last extension expires, he still doesn't want to go back to Pittsburgh. He absolutely refuses. So he rents a little room on the 6th floor of a building, which was called the maid's room. They were always called that. It was under the roof of Paris. No electricity, no water, no stove, nothing, all alone in a room like this. And once in a while, my mother would bring him some food, or my sister, who is 9.5 years old, would bring him food as well, which was quite dangerous because of wearing this star. You know, it was dangerous for anybody to walk in the streets of Paris. So this goes on like this until the biggest roundup of Jews in Paris. It's called en français la rafle du Veldiv, which was the roundup of 13,000 Jewish people, men, women, children, older people, sick ones, healthy ones. Any Jew was rounded up, which was not a big thing for the Germans because they had wanted 28. They had wanted 28,000. They only got 13,000. However, my family was not affected because there was a law that stipulated that if a child is born is less than 2 years, the family will be spared at that time. Well, this law later on is going to be rescinded, and everyone will go. But during that roundup, my uncle, the brother of my mother, when he went home, his wife had been taken. And my aunt, the sister of my mother, when she went home, her husband had been taken. So my aunt decided to come back to our apartment. And my uncle came also to our apartment. So my aunt Esther came with her 2 daughters. And my uncle came alone. And my father, who was so lonely in that little room, he also decided to come to our apartment. So if you can imagine, 3 rooms, there are 4 adults and 8 children.
Wow.
So I always say, you know, you or your children, if they complain about having to share a room with a sibling and complain about it, let them just think how we lived in 3 rooms like that. We were the lucky ones because we had our own washroom, which was a tiny, tiny room that when you sat, your forehead was touching the wall. That's how small it was.
Wow.
So it was very, very difficult. So at that time, when my father came home, we were not allowed to call him tate or daddy or father because we had said that he was a friend. So we called him Monsieur, which was very big a problem for me because I was very attached to him. And it was so sad, you know, to call my dad by Monsieur. You know, it was so impersonal. So this went on. We were, at least we were a family still. So that was from July the 16th until September the 13th. And for that, I have to ask you to show a picture of my siblings at that time.
Absolutely.
Okay. So those are my siblings with their names. So on that date, on the 13th of September 1942, it was Rosh Hashanah, and in the afternoon, the three oldest one, the three girls, it's Cecile, then my sister Isabel, and then the other Isabel, were at the market to buy some groceries because the Jews had only a small window in to buy groceries. My two brothers were at the synagogue because we were not religious, but my parents sent them there for Rosh Hashanah. So they were at the synagogue. So the only one who was the oldest of the last three was me, and my two siblings, Mireille and Monique, were really babies because it was in September. Monique was not even a year old at that time, and Mireille was about less than 3 years old as well. So all of a sudden, we are in the house, and there was a huge bang at the door, and the door is forced open, and who comes in? Two policemen, French policemen, and one man in civilian clothes. And he doesn't speak French that much, but he has a list in his hand. Now, the Germans were so meticulous that they knew that the reason they came to our apartments is because they knew that my aunt had lost her husband during the roundup. So they knew that they had the husband, they were looking for the daughter, for the wife, and they were looking also for her oldest daughter, who was born in Poland and was a year when she arrived in France. So at that time, she is only 13. She was born in 1930. And they came also for my uncle because they had taken his wife in the roundup. Mm. So they came to pick him up. So my mother explains that her niece, Cecile, is not home because she went to buy some groceries. So the German looks at my father, and I'll never forget that because he had a smile that was like a half a smile, like a mean smile. In French, we call it a rictus. And he said, who is that? And he points to my father. And so my mother says, well, he's a friend. And the German looks at him and he says, oh, so I'm going to take your friend, but when your niece comes back from the grocery store, bring her to the police station and I will give you back your friend. So my mother turns to me, who was looking at this, and she tells me, you take care of the two babies, take care of them because I'm going to follow her sister, her brother, and her husband. And then she turns around and I'm looking at that. I said to myself, Daddy, what did you do? Two policemen. You must have done something very bad to be taken like this. And I couldn't say anything. And that was the last time that I saw my father. we were living on the fourth floor without an elevator, and I can still remember and hear my aunt screaming in the stairs and the steps, boom, 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 going with every step down. And then I found out that my mother is downstairs with the three adults. They go into a van, and my siblings, the oldest, the girls, they ran out because they heard something is happening in our building. And the two boys are running out of also the synagogue, which was not too far. And my mother takes from her pocket all the coupons that she had for bread. And she tells them, go and buy all the bread that you can find. Of course, before that, she tells Cecile to come upstairs because she's the one that is that they want to take. So she comes upstairs, but my mother gives all the food, the tickets for the bread, and they go to all the bakeries that they can find, and they bring the bread at the police station, and that will be also for them the last time that they will see my father and uncle and aunt. And for the other Isabel, my cousin, that's the last time she will see her mother. So my mother is on the sidewalk, and she's in terrible state, scratching her face. Her hair is in complete disarray. And she says, and she's left alone. She lost that day her husband, her brother, her sister, and she is left alone with her 6 children, her 2 nieces, and she is not yet 32 years old. We learned afterwards, long time afterwards, we found out that my uncle and my aunt were gassed as soon as they arrived in Auschwitz, which was 3 days after they were arrested. They were sent to the Drancy camp, which was the antechamber to going to Auschwitz. So my aunt Esther and my uncle Nathan were gassed immediately. And for years we thought that my father was also had that same thing happen to him. However, we found out later that he suffered for 2.5 years, and he was killed in 1945, the 21st of January, on the march, the death march, and it was 6 days before liberation.
That is very, that's an unspeakable tragedy that he died, especially so close to that moment of liberation.
Right.
And but something that, Denise, while we were speaking earlier, and it really does stand out to me, is the incredible courage of your mother. And, many women during the Holocaust, in circumstances where, husbands and fathers and brothers taken away, and a lot of the time women were left with, lots of dependents that they were responsible for, whether they had employment or not, and that an unimaginable situation to be in. So I
Yes,
can, yeah.
and at that time we started to be very scared. So because my mother still had to work, she still had to bring something at home by herself. She was a seamstress. She could do lots of things. She was even in one of the factories where she worked, she was bringing home attached to her leg big spools of wool, because my mother could knit in one night a pullover for us. I remember a pullover that she knitted for me. In one night, she did the whole pullover. She was very, very adept with her fingers. She was very good. But we were very scared because she was the only adult. So we hung to her like she was the pillar of our family. And I remember being so scared when sometimes she was late after the curfew, and we would look through the curtain a little bit, and and my sister would look, and then the children would say, no, 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 don't, because if they see the light, they could come up. It was a stage of fear. And I remember during sometimes there were some bombing, and the last four children were petrified. I was petrified of the bombing, the noise that it made. So I remember jumping into my mother's bed, and the four youngest, so my mother, I was on the right leg, and I used to hold that leg like this to me. I still can feel the warmth of my mother's leg and the skin that was so soft. And I had the right leg. On the right arm was the baby, and on the left arm was my brother, who was only 7 years old. And then there was Mireille, who had the other leg. And this leg will follow me through the war. And whenever I was sad, I would just remember this leg that, some children, they have a teddy bear. Well, I had this leg of my mother, and that kept me for the rest of the war, actually. And so then my mother, in the end, it's already 43, in the middle of the year. And in 43, my little baby sister she's going to be 2. So there is an added risk. And so she contacted a Jewish organization called OSE, O-S-E, which is Œuvre de Secours aux Enfants. And they, with their organization, which was, of course, it was a clandestine organization, but they were finding place to hide the Jewish children. So they found us once. The first place that we went was a farm, and we were the 8 of us. We were very lucky. The 8 children were in that place. It was called chez Madame Bayon, and I remember going there when the 2 Isabel came last. First was my 2 brothers, then the 3 little ones plus Cecile, and then the 2 Isabel. Now, I just have to tell you, laughing, because every time I say the 2 Isabel, I remember, why are they called both Isabel? Because my sister was born first in April, and that same year, in December, and when they asked my mother, how will you name the little girl? Well, my mother said, Ite baile, which is Ite baile in Polish, in Yiddish. So the nurse said, well, that's not a name. It's not a French name. How about Isabelle? Okay, so my mother says, well, that's fine, Isabelle. She was the firstborn of my mother. And then in December, her sister gave birth also to a girl. And my aunt didn't have a big imagination. So she decided if it was good for my sister, it's good for me too. So she called her Isabel. So every time I think about the 2 Isabel, I laugh. Because, and the 2 Isabel, they spent the whole war together because my mother didn't want anybody to accuse her of favorizing her daughter to the expense of her niece. So the 2 Isabel spent the whole war together. So we went into that place, the 8 of us, and that we were not very happy there. Actually, that was the first time that I heard somebody said to my brother, the oldest one, who was a big macho boy of 8.5 years, and he said something not smart, and Madame Bayon gave him a big slap and told him he's a dirty Jew. And in my little head, I am 5 years old, I said, my brother is not dirty. Why does she call him dirty Jew? Anyway, we were very unhappy in that place. We were hungry, and and we couldn't do anything. And I was petrified of the animals. All the farm animals in Paris is only cats and dogs. Mm. So all of a sudden, there are cows and horses and pigs, huge animals. I was very scared of that. And how did my mother find out that we were hungry? Was because she missed her baby, and she asked a neighbor, Monsieur Henri, to come and bring Cécile, the oldest one, with Monique. Mm. And when they came to Paris, they didn't go to our place because one evening, just before the two Isabel joined us, a policeman in the street told my mother, "Don't go in your building tonight because something is happening there." So my mother took the two girls and went to a friend for the night. The next morning, when she came to the apartment, there was a seal attached to the doors, and if you broke that seal, you could be shot on the spot. But we were at the end of the corridor on the last floor, so nobody saw her. She went in, she grabbed a few pieces of material and the school bags, whatever she could carry in her hands. And then from that time on, she could never go back to the apartment. She had to hide also somewhere for herself. So that day, she has Monique and Cécile, and she gives them a glass of milk and some cookies. And as some crumbs fell on the floor, the baby went flat on her stomach, and she licked all the crumbs that had fallen. And my mother was horrified at that point. So she decided to ask Monsieur Henri to again come and fetch us. So he came, he took us, and the Madame Bayon was very angry that we leave because she risked her life by hiding Jewish people. However, for her, we were a big source of revenue. That's why we were the 8 of us. She had all the coupons for clothes, medication, food, everything she had from 8 children. Plus, she had free labor. We were taking care of the cows, that they don't go somewhere that is not the field. And my brother Maurice particularly was very strong. He was helping with the animals and the farms. So she offered a lot of things to Monsieur Henri in terms of rabbit and chicken in order for us to stay. And he said no. He picked us up and we went to Paris. Now, I don't remember where we were. So for my mother again started to be very scared. There were a lot of German and policemen because the French police was 100% working against the Jews, most of them. And they were going from door to door and so on, looking for Jews because many were in hiding. So my mother contacted again that same organization. And then they found us another place. This time we are all separated. So what happened is that we go to the train station, and we at the train station, my mother gives us an egg, a raw egg to eat. How you eat a raw egg? You prick the top, you prick the bottom, and you go. And it's disgusting. But at least we have some protein. My mother is happy that we have something. We go in the trains. The trains are all dark because not to bring the bombing, the planes to see. So the train is always black. And we come to the quay. And there are people, strangers that we never know, we never knew. and they're waiting for us. So the two Isabel went one place, the two brothers another place, Cecile alone, Mireille, the sister after me, goes alone, and Monique and me in another place. So this time it's not a farm. I am with Monique, but we are left completely alone in terms of activities, except that they have a daughter who is about 15 years old, and she has skin disease, like poison ivy, something like this, very itchy. And of course, who is named scratcher number one? Me. So every night I have to scratch her legs, which is disgusting also. And I remember almost as bad as the egg that we had to eat. So so that's how, we spend our time. And then our guardians are starting to be very, very scared because now they risk a lot. And they contact my mother and said, we want your children to be baptized. So my mother says, as long as the children are alive, she gave the authorization. So I remember this, my baptism very well, except for my sister Monique, who is still very, very young. When they put the salt on her tongue, she went and spit it all out. She was funny. So it was sad. So anyway, after I think one more month, they decided to let us go back to Paris because they're too scared. So we're again in Paris. So now it's hard, but my mother is still looking everywhere because now it's already 1944. I mean, after we stayed here and here. So it's already 1944. And I think that Paris is about to be liberated, I think. But they still look for the Jews. Even when Paris is liberated, the convoy still went. There were 85 convoy of 1,000 people, each convoy. My father was in the number 33. So my mother befriended a woman on the street. And it happened that she was a nun in civilian clothes. And she told the story. And this lady, she was a nun, the sister of Zion, a very well-known order, les Sœurs de Sion. And they had two boarding schools, one in Paris and one in the north of France, in the city of Saint-Omer, which is not too far from the Belgian border. So she decided to take us to the Saint-Omer, the 6 girls, and the 2 boys will go to another place to where there are monks. So that's the end of, close to the end of 1944. And at that time, when I am going to be 7 years old, I have to make my first communion, and we are baptized. We were baptized, so we are completely Catholic. And from that time until 1948, the 3 youngest one will be in that a convent, and that's it for the hiding.
Wow. Thank you, Denise. That's fascinating, and I have so many questions about what life might have been like as a young child when you were growing up in a Jewish environment, and then all of a sudden, sort of growing up in a Catholic environment. So maybe can you share a little bit about what that was like and some of your key memories post-war in France, and then when did you return to your mother? You said 1948?
Right, yes. So in 1945, when it was the end of the war, my mother went to the apartment, and it was taken by strangers. They had taken our apartment. She had to go to court in order to get it back. So when she got it back, it was empty. There was absolutely nothing, not even a glass or a spoon, nothing. So she had to work until 46 in order to bring the girls, the oldest girls. Then she worked for another year to buy the necessary for the two boys. And for us, we were still in the convent. And then one day the Mother Superior calls us in her office, and she says, "You are going home tomorrow, and you have a new father." A new father? What happened? We were so shocked. But in those times, you couldn't question the adults. But together, we asked, what happened? And the next day, we take the train just with the clothes that we had on our back. Not even a change of socks or underwear. Just what we were wearing. Because the nuns were so angry at my mother for taking us out that they didn't want. It took her a lot of meeting and talk in order to extract us from the convent, because the church, the Catholic Church, once you are baptized, you belong to the church. So that's their dogma, and you cannot go around. So we left anyway, and we arrived in Paris. And there is, my mother has remarried, and we meet our siblings, the two brothers. And now, I can say that this was terribly very hard for me. I couldn't reconnect with my mother. So 6 years of separation, I couldn't reconnect. Where was the warmth of that leg was the only thing, it had disappeared. So I lost not only my father, but I feel that I lost my mother as well. It was too hard. And my stepfather, I found out later on that he was the one who had insisted that we come out of the convent, because he had been in the Auschwitz, where his wife and his 3 children had died. And he had known my father before. He lived in the same building as we did. So they had met after the war. They went together. He knew his wife is not coming back. My father is not coming back. So they got married. And one day he said to us, he said, "Bring me what you had from the convent." Now, my life in the convent was fantastic. I loved the convent, actually. I loved the everything, the organ playing and the Latin and everything in my first communion, where I was all in white and walking in the aisle. I liked everything. So, and we went to the school village, to the school in the village, because the nuns, they didn't want to teach us, because we were poor, we were orphans. So they didn't want to teach us. So we went while they were teaching the other pensioner, we were in the village. In the village, we learned the Old Testament, and I loved it. I loved it. The story of Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, and so on. And my father says, "Bring me what you have from the convent." So we bring I had beautiful cards with Jesus and the bleeding heart and the Virgin Mary with a beautiful blue veil. And he took everything, he tore it up and threw it in the garbage. That was my cultural shock. And he says, "From now on, you are going to learn that you are Jewish, and you will forget about what you learned before." So after school, after our regular school, we went every night to a synagogue and learned everything. And what did I learn? I learned about Abraham and Jacob and Joseph. And I said, they told me lies, because how can those people be in the same religion, different religion, and be the same people? So I think it's at that time that I didn't believe in God.
Hmm. Understandable. In that struggle, I think is something that, I hear a lot of survivors have have had a lot of questions around their faith, and um, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and Denise, I know that we don't have a long time left to speak together, but I do want to just remind our audience, if anyone does have questions or comments that they'd like to share with Denise, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. Okay. Um, and so, Denise, maybe could you share a little bit about, um, for ex you live today in Canada. So, what was your journey like to come to Canada?
Well, it was in 1956. I went to school till 55. I finished my degree. I had a degree of finished high school. At the same time, I was a secretary, bookkeeper, and a shorthand typist. So I was a secretary. And my parents wanted to emigrate out of France. It was such a hardship country. So anyway, they remembered that my cousin Cecile had relatives in Montreal. So they decided to send me to Montreal. So the boat was 10 days by boat, and it was a cruise, beautiful cruise for me. Sad, but it was a beautiful cruise, and I arrived at my cousin that I didn't know, and I stayed with them for 3 years. So I worked in in. I was lucky that they were in the business of typewriters. They were selling and renting typewriters. So I was able for 2 weeks to re-practice my typing, because the keyboard is not the same. And then when I was ready to work, I went, I applied, and I started that same afternoon. I wish everybody was that lucky. So, and it was very strange at that time, because the French Canadian in Montreal, I find out they were against themselves, the French Canadians, because I was paid $30, even though I had the document, I had the education, everything, I had the trade. I was paid $30 a week. And somebody that I met on the ship, who was a seamstress, she had never worked in an office. She found a job in a bank as a teller, and she was paid double. So when I went to my boss, he said, no, because she's working in English. You work only in French. So you are unilingual. So the whole office was only paid half of the English people what they paid.
Wow. So you experienced the discrimination against Francophones
Yes,
firsthand.
and not only that, but my cousin, who had been living at my mother through the whole war, she charged me half of my salary to stay with her.
Goodness.
And I was there for 3 years before I got married, and I didn't have a room. I slept on a couch that didn't even open. So it was hard. And then after a year and a half, I spoke to my parents. I told them, don't come, because it's too hard. You will be uprooted. You will lose your friends, and you have the other siblings are in France. And I said, no, don't come. But I was already free, so I didn't want to go back. I had my friends here, so I stayed in Canada, and I don't regret it.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you don't regret it, but of course, I'm sure that journey was very difficult, and,
Mhm.
arriving and not having a lot of support and being in that
being alone.
situation. Yeah, exactly. It took a lot of courage. I think you were drawing on that courage that you saw in your mother as a young child. We have a lot of beautiful comments in the chat here, and I'll just read a couple of them out here because I think that you should hear them. Veronica says, incredible story. Merci, Denise, de partager tout cela avec nous. Um, Audrey says, so articulate and well done, Denise. Your story speaks to your strength and that of all of your siblings and the heroism of your mother. Thank you for sharing it with us. And
Yeah,
from Jan, I believe, or maybe Jan, but probably Jan, Denise, you are amazing and your story is heartbreaking and extremely informative. God bless you for what you do, and I hope you continue to do. You make a difference, and we need teachers in our world and teachers who have lived through horrific times yet came through the other side. And that's
thank
so
you.
true. We have a lot to learn from you and people like you who are willing to share your memories.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, lots of beautiful comments here. Denise, maybe before we wrap up today, are there any last words that you want to leave with our audience? Any important messages to share?
Yes, well, I could say that I'm happy to be in Canada. It's the best country in the world. This is the best gift I gave my children. And but also, freedom is not free.
Hmm.
Freedom is very expensive, actually, and you have to work at it in order to keep your freedom. I have built a beautiful family. I have 3 children and seven grandchildren and 8 great grandchildren. So,
Wow.
um, so we are here to stay. And the Germans who tried to annihilate us, they missed. They didn't succeed. However, we are now in 2025, and we are not yet at the level in terms of Jewish population. We are not at the same level as we were before World War II. So it is very, very sad. And I can't help thinking of all the millions who died. If they would have been able to live, we wouldn't have the cancer, we wouldn't have sicknesses, that because the Jewish people are so important to the world with all what they have built, what they have given in the Nobel Prize and so on. I won't go too far. So imagine another 6 million who would contribute to the world. And also, I would like to say that you shouldn't be bystander. This you must receive from everybody. If you have children, tell them not to be scared with bullying. They should fight against it. And even you should speak out. You always should speak out. Because there is that poem that was written by a German man, which says, first they came to take the socialist, and I was not a socialist, so I didn't speak out. And then they came and they came to take the Protestants, and I was not a Protestant, so I didn't speak out. Then they came for the Jews, but I was not a Jew, so I didn't speak out. But then when they came for me, there was nobody to speak out. So you have to understand that you have to stand up to the bullies. And I think that the Germans were huge bullies. They were the biggest bullies that existed. So, and I am sad because with what happened on October the 7th, it's again that we are still scared, we are still pushed, we are still killed, and I cannot help but being very fearful all the time. Or I think always of that.
Well, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I think, one of the things that gives me hope is, hearing stories like yours and the courage of your mother and other people who, in incredibly difficult circumstances, achieved the impossible. We can all, I think, take example from from that story. So thank you very much, Denise. And I really hope that you have a good afternoon, and we really do thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Yes,
And I
thank
know
you.
that we're going to send you through all of the comments that we've gotten in the chat so you can read through them in your own
Great.
time.
Thank you very much, guys. And it was nice of you to come and listen to my story. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you, Denise. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you very much for listening today.